Well, hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Gardner. I'm here with the Bi-State Regional Commission. And with me is...
Hello, I'm Brian Wright. I'm the Muscatine County Emergency Manager.
And we're here today to talk about an update to the Muscatine County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. It's called multi-jurisdictional because it involves participation from all the jurisdictions within Muscatine County, so the county government as well as the individual community governments. And I'll just tell you a little about what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to briefly touch on what is hazard mitigation planning and why we do it. We'll talk a little about what's in the current Muscatine County Hazard Mitigation Plan, which is in effect through next year, and then what individual jurisdictions will be doing to participate in this update, followed by what exactly the update process is going to look like in terms of the timeline and participation. And then I'll end with some next steps, and if anybody has any questions, we'll take those questions. So. What is hazard mitigation planning? Essentially, it is a way of thinking in advance about risks to our communities and our infrastructure and the population living within them, and thinking of things we can do ahead of disaster events to either lessen the impact or speed up the recovery from those impacts. And that's actually the most important thing in terms of thinking about this. It's not a disaster response necessarily. It's not a plan that goes into effect once a disaster hits. It's something you chart out, here are things we can build or steps we can take to lessen the impact of these disasters when they happen. Why do we update the hazard mitigation plan? Well, the short answer is it is required to do so in order to qualify for certain funding through the Federal Emergency Management Administration, or FEMA. The Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 provides the legal framework for the FEMA mitigation planning requirements. So they tell us what needs to be in the plan, and then we get together and make sure those are all in our plans for the county. And keeping the plan current allows us to remain qualified for those funding opportunities. Every plan is required to be updated every 5 years, and that's because hazards change over time, and hopefully as these plans are put into place, we start checking things off the list of things we want to do. So FEMA wants us to check in every 5 years, take the things out that have already been accomplished, see if there are new mitigation actions we'd like to consider and add those in, and then put that new plan into place. The current plan for Muscatine County, as I mentioned, is good through September of 2020. It's now September of 2019, and although it may sound like a lot of time for us to have a year yet left to plan on it, FEMA requires 6 months of review of any document we put before them. So we really have about 6 months to get the new plan in place before we adopt it. So what is in the current Muscatine County Hazard Mitigation Plan? Well, like most mitigation plans, it's divided into 5 chapters. The first chapter looks at legal prerequisites, and that's a bit of what I covered already. Why do we do hazard mitigation planning? What is the legal foundation for it? Chapter 2 looks at the planning process. What were the steps we took to look at our hazards, to think about where our priorities are, and to come up with a list of mitigation actions we would like to pursue. Chapter 3 goes a little more into depth in the risk assessment, so it takes a look at hazards that have occurred since the last time the plan was in place and gives us an opportunity to say, well, maybe we feel like our priorities are changing a little, or to say, oh no, that looks good, and we sort of have figured out where the hazards are. Chapter 4 outlines the mitigation strategies, and those are the steps we'd like to take to try to lessen the impact of these disaster events. And then Chapter 5 is the plan maintenance process, and that can include a lot of things. It could be plans for the planning committee to continue meeting in the next 5 years to keep ourselves on track or see if there are other things we want to add in, or it can just be a commitment saying that we're going to get together before the next plan expires to start working on a new one the way we are right now. Of these sections, Bi-State Regional Commission, which is the organization I'm with, will be taking responsibility or primary responsibility for updating chapters 1, 2, and 5. That's what we can do. And then chapter 3, where we look at the risk assessment, and chapter 4, where we look at the mitigation strategies, those really we need the help of the jurisdictions to determine what the risks are and where the priorities lie for mitigation strategies. And when you think about it, that makes sense. A good plan shouldn't come from the top down. It shouldn't be us or FEMA saying, here's what you need to do. It really should come from the communities themselves saying, this is what makes sense to us in terms of what we would like to do and where we see the risks being. So in 2015, when we put this plan together, most of the jurisdictions within Muscatine County participated. The two exceptions were Stockton and Durant. And Durant didn't participate because, as you can see on the map, most of Durant lies outside of Muscatine County and within Cedar County. So they actually participated in the Cedar County plan, which is still current and will continue to be included in that plan. We have reached out to all of the jurisdictions that participated, as well as Stockton, and we've also reached out to all the school districts to see if they would like to participate in the plan, because in addition to community school districts are able to have sections within the plan itself. So in terms of the participating jurisdictions, what they are responsible for is designating a primary contact for myself and Brian to be working with and emailing as we move through the process to make sure we've got all our information correct. We ask that participating jurisdictions attend our planning committee meetings. We have 3 official meetings scheduled for this process, and we're asking that committee members participate in 2 out of 3.
Correct.
And then to provide additional information as requested, we'll be contacting jurisdictions in the weeks ahead with information updating their profiles in terms of their population base and sending information about hazards. And we ask that they email us back to keep the process moving forward. And then when it is completed, when we have a draft of our planning document, we'll be sending that to the participating jurisdictions, asking them to read through it and suggest edits before we send it off to FEMA. The big thing for us is we don't want to have meetings just to meet. We want to be moving the planning process forward in each of these meetings. Yes?
I just had a question about the meetings, the
Yeah.
2 out of 3
Mhm.
for the jurisdictions. If there was an emergency or a conflict or something, would a designee count towards?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. We don't want to set barriers to participation, but we do want to make sure that all the jurisdictions are making an earnest effort to have their input included. And that's just to satisfy requirements from FEMA. But that's an excellent question. Designees would absolutely count. Now, in terms of other requirements from FEMA, there's also a public input requirement, and that's part of the reason why we're meeting here today, to get information out to the public, to let everyone know that we're in the process of updating this plan, because, of course, no one of us can be everywhere and know all the hazards that exist, and the public, has important things to say about their experiences in terms of hazards and where they think mitigation priorities might need to lie. And we are having 2 kickoff meetings. This is the second of the 2. We also plan to make all of the planning committee meetings public, so members of the public can come to any of those meetings. And we've asked for jurisdictions who are participating in it to mention the planning update process in city council meetings so that the public is aware who attend those meetings or read those minutes and know that they are able to offer input on this plan as well. And then we're always looking for other ideas of ways to participate. One of the really excellent ideas that came up was hosting one of our public meetings here at Muscatine Community College so that we could record it and share the link to help spread the word. If other folks have great ideas, we want to hear them. We'll certainly discuss implementing them.
Certainly do.
So in terms of the project timeline, we got started in August with our first kickoff meeting with the participating jurisdictions, and now we're in September, so we're doing the public kickoff meetings. Following this, we'll really start kicking into high gear in October, when we'll be emailing out, and actually we'll email out before the end of October, or the end of September, the hazards that we have collected that have happened since 2015 for jurisdictions to review, the county profiles, a list of critical facilities that were included in the last plan, and we'll ask the communities or participating jurisdictions to read through those and come up with what the new priorities should be. We'll have a planning committee meeting in October to go over that information and make sure that we're on track, especially as we move forward for the next several months. In November, we'll be updating the mitigation action tables, so we'll send out a list of the tables that exist in the current plan to ask what mitigation strategies have already been implemented, to ask what need to be added to the list, and then also to begin thinking about how do we prioritize those lists in terms of what we would like to do first. In November and December, the bi-state staff will undertake revising the individual chapters, and we'll be sending those out as we do to the participating jurisdictions to review and provide feedback. All of that will be conducted via email and phone, and this is something that has changed from the last planning process. Because we have such a short timeline to get the new plan up to speed, we have been working with the State Hazard Mitigation Officer for Iowa, or the state SHMO, which is officially my favorite acronym in government, to approve this plan where we can conduct a lot of these meetings via phone and email so that we don't all have to try to be in the same place at the same time to do it. At the beginning of early January, we'll have that draft plan ready to go and review for the individual jurisdictions. We'll have one more committee meeting at that time. We'll send out the draft ahead of time for everyone to read, and then when the committee comes together, we'll go through and make sure that any edits that need to be made are noted so that we can get those edits made before presenting the plan both to the public and to FEMA. And so you can see in January and February, we enter into the review period. We will have at least one more public meeting where we will have copies of the draft plan available for folks to comment on. And then we will send the plan off to FEMA at that time for them to start reviewing. That begins the 6-month review process in February. While FEMA is doing that, we will be asking individual jurisdictions to pass resolutions adopting the plan, which is the final thing that needs to be included in it. Everybody needs to say, we've read through it, we agree with what's in here, we're adopting it as our plan for the next 5 years. And then once we have those, we will compile them and pull the whole entire document together in August of 2020 so that it will be in place prior to the expiration of the current plan in September 2020. So in terms of what next steps look like for this planning process, we touched on it a little in the planning timeline, but we also have an advisory committee that we will be notifying that we're updating the plan. And what the advisory committee is, are members of resource organizations within the state of Iowa, such as hydrologists or, the state SHMO's office, for example, and also neighboring jurisdictions. So we'll let Cedar and Scott County know that we are updating the plan. And that's just for plan coordination so that if there are folks who have important information for us to share and consider at the state level, that they know that they can participate in this process and send us information. And also for coordinating efforts with neighboring counties. If there are resources they'd like to share or ideas they're working on that really work well for them, they can provide that feedback so that we could consider their actions as well for possible adoption in our plan. We sent out a list of that advisory committee, or I stand corrected, we will be sending out a list of that advisory committee to all the participating jurisdictions in case they'd like to add anybody to the list. And then we will email every member of the advisory committee letting them know we're starting the process. We will also be emailing all the participating jurisdictions a list of recent hazards that have occurred since 2015. And that includes weather hazards, but also hazardous spill events, because both of those were included in the prior plan. So we'll look over, and that will hopefully enable jurisdictions to think about what hazards have occurred recently and to rank the hazards so that we can come up with our new tables showing where we think the greatest threats are, I would say. We'll also be sending out county profile information, that list of critical facilities I mentioned, and the jurisdictional profiles for jurisdictions to review. And then we'll come together and discuss all of this fun stuff in the October meeting. I had mentioned revising the hazard plans, and as you can see, what I have up here is the list of hazards that was in the 2010 plan, next to the list of hazards that was in the 2015 plan. And you can see that the priorities, or the hazards, did change a little, subtly so. In 2010, the number one hazard was considered to be a windstorm. In 2015, that went a little lower down on the list, and it was supplanted by tornado. And you can see that these all have scores next to them. Those of you who may have participated in the plan before will remember that you didn't necessarily have to come up with this score on your own, saying, oh, well, I feel like a windstorm now seems like a 23.26 hazard. We actually have a spreadsheet that does that work for us based on scoring that's done by the individual communities. It's a weighted table, and that weighted table is based on a formula used in the Iowa hazard mitigation plan. So the entire state mitigation plan, we just use the same formula. And the way it works is the greatest weight is given to probability. So that's the green slice of pie that I have up here. And that's followed by severity. Those are the two heaviest weights in the formula. And then they're followed by warning time. So a classic example would be a tornado. We tend not to have a lot of warning time that a tornado is going to come. And so that might get a higher score based on that. Whereas flooding, you tend to know is going to happen a little bit more in advance. And that allows you to prepare more for it. So its weight goes down a little. And then duration, actually the exact opposite thing happens there. A tornado happens very quickly and is over, whereas flooding can be quite prolonged, so they get different weights as a result. And for any jurisdictions that are participating in this, the good news is bi-state's going to do this math, or rather the Excel sheet we have developed is going to do this math. So what we do is send out a list of all the hazards in a table, and we also send the data that I had mentioned before. And then we ask jurisdictions to make their best professional judgment on a number of criteria, ranking them on a scale of 1 to 4. That gets plugged into the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet comes up with the rankings for the individual jurisdictions. And then once we get all those individual jurisdiction profiles back for the hazards, we then plug them into a second spreadsheet, which then further weights them by population in the community, and that is how we determine the countywide jurisdiction table. This is maybe my favorite slide in the entire deck. This is an actual picture of my actual desk, by way of saying that if anybody has any questions throughout this process, you have my contact information here, both my email and my phone number, so you can give me a call, have this slide up on screen, and imagine you're sitting right across from me as we have a conversation about potential hazards and mitigation actions. And I am happy to answer any of those questions now or then as we move through the process. So that is actually the end of the presentation for now. Are there any questions in the audience that we can answer? Well, I think we can consider that a job well done, Brian.
Exactly.
So as I said before, thank you so much for being with us today and learning more about the hazard mitigation planning process. If you have any questions going forward, you have my contact information, and Brian's contact information we can make available as well. I'm sure it's on the county website already. And yeah, we look forward to getting a new plan in place by this time next year.